South African consumers are displaying more positive sentiments about their financial future, possibly driven by the easing of inflation and a hold on interest rates. This is according to Deloitte's latest Consumer Signals report, which tracks consumer behaviour. However, there are some serious concerns about the economy. The gross domestic productivity figures showed that the economy shrunk by 0.2% in the last quarter, marking a shift from the growth in the previous two quarters. South African consumers are implementing cost-saving strategies to cope with rising living costs. So let's find out more about the consumer industry leader survey at Deloitte Africa. Rodger George is joining us. So, Rodger, it's so good to have you. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, good morning, Leanne. Morning, listeners.
So it certainly has been a very tough year. There's no two ways about it all round. Wherever you look, South Africans have been struggling. But you're saying, according to some of the findings, that South Africans are switching their spending habits in response to this tough economy. Talk to us about what the changes are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that, as you said, consumers have faced a lot of headwinds, increased high interest rates, increased fuel prices. I think the costs of load shedding feeding through the production system, going into sort of the manufacturing, then feeding itself and finding itself into the consumer wallet. But having said that, our survey is showing some form of resilience of consumers, particularly their intent to spend over the festive season. And I think it's going to be a case of, where they allocate the disposable income that they have. So probably less is more, but definitely an indication to at least enjoy the festivities.
So in terms of looking at some of the factors that may contribute to why there's a bit more positivity year on year, what is it? I mean, where are we finding the confidence?
Yeah, so I think, consumers are very anxious still, as you mentioned earlier, very concerned about their financial well-being. Almost 56% of people are saying that they're concerned about their financial situation. And if you break that down, 2/3 are consumed around, their capacity to save. And that affects their confidence to spend. But having said that, there is an indication. So when we look at the survey from last year, we've been running the survey since 2020. When we look at the numbers last year to where we are now, there has been a shift towards more positive sense. And I think that, maybe, over time, people have become more used to managing tightened wallets. I think they're becoming better at spending. Their shopping habits have certainly changed in the way they shop. And all of that has affected, their ability and I think their confidence to spend a bit more over the season.
Okay, so it really is the consumer who's just had to adjust a lot of things. Because I've been noticing, I mean, maybe just people have left. I personally do a lot of online shopping, so that's how my changes have happened over this time. So when I do go into the shops, I notice that they're not as packed as they usually are at this time of the year. But maybe I've just missed the rush. Do we know yet? I mean, are we able to judge in terms of the consumer spend yet? Or is it too early now to talk about that?
I think it's probably too early,
yeah.
But I mean, if you look at the intent to spend as they were moving into the season, right? Most of the consumers were saying we're going to really be smart about how we shop. So we're going to do a bit more planning up front in terms of the number of stores we visit. It's certainly a value proposition. So we're going to look and find out where the value lies. We had Black Friday and there was quite a surge over the Black Friday weekend. Be interesting to see how those numbers pan out. And I do agree with you. I was in centers sort of over the weekend and you can see less people, but I think people are still shopping. They're just buying, less is more. And there definitely is a shift towards online spend. You can see all the retailers reporting increased double-digit growth in that space. Although having said that, it is still quite a small spend of the basket. And I think people are just, being smart and cautious around where they're going to put their very precious rands.
Yeah, indeed. And boy, are they precious. They certainly are at this time of the year. But as we've been saying, I mean, consumers have been facing a lot of these challenges. But how we find the resilience, I have no idea. But there certainly seems to be some resilience, as you're saying. But is this across all income levels, or are we only seeing it in some income brackets?
It's interesting to see how people are split, and our survey does go into sort of low, middle, and high income spend. And it's been interesting to see how people are allocating the spend. One of the things that was clear to me across all levels is that the spend on healthcare is quite low. So we allocate groceries, we allocate food, we allocate clothing above healthcare, which is, as I said, quite a concern. But having said that, if you look at some of the smaller, the lower income brackets, they have tended to switch some of their spend towards electronics and sort of airtime and data. So there's a move towards that. The sort of more affluent consumers are still diverting some of their spend towards entertainment and leisure. The mid-income are tending to do more cooking at home. So they would go out and buy more food, spend more time preparing. And there probably is two things. That could be, watching the Food Network channel and becoming a chef. But I suspect that one of the real reasons is actually that it's driven by cost. And South Africans generally over time have tended to be quite wasteful consumers. We buy a packet of tomatoes, a bag of oranges. But I think people are being smart, they're buying less. And they're putting more effort into preparing. And one of the other things that came out actually is that people, the way they buy in terms of food, they're buying cheaper cuts of meat, cheaper cuts of protein, and mixing and matching and taking what you have at home and creating a meal.
Yeah, I think that really is the way things are looking, and it seems across the board like that, because I know with one of the things, inflation is high. Interest rates are sitting still high, even though they're on hold, they're still at very high levels. No, there was a little bit of optimism having a look and seeing that the US may start adjusting their interest rates, and that sort of saw a little bit of buoyancy within the markets. But it's still a great worry. We're still in a cycle that is very tough. In fact, let's just look at these numbers that came out. South Africa's fourth quarter consumer confidence fell to the lowest in 2 decades for the festive season. And that's something high. It fell to -17 from -16 in the third quarter of 2023. So this is indicative that we're still in very, very tough times.
Yeah, look, so obviously the high interest rates are being driven by inflation. And as long as inflation sits and where it is, the interest rates will prevail to try and bring that inflationary number down. If you look at our survey, consumers are, out of all the 20 countries we've surveyed, and we do this every month, by the way, South African consumers are the most concerned about inflation, with 86% of them really being concerned about, as an example, increases in, food prices. And as I said earlier, I think the costs of production, the costs of manufacturing, the increased load shedding, the high fuel, all of that filtering through into the consumer's pocket. So as long as inflation is there, I think high interest rates are going to persist, which is not good for consumers. And as you say, consumer confidence is low. But I've always said, you can't take Christmas out of South Africans. So I do expect some spend, and it's probably going to be, I think, focused toward food and spending a lot of time with family.
Yeah, that's a fact. I've noticed that as well. I really have noticed that. So it's the smaller gift, but it's the coming together. What about the leisure travel in South Africa? We were having this conversation as well, and I think you looked into that too. We were saying that, usually it's a lot quieter in Joburg, but there's still a lot of people here. I don't know if that we're here, so that makes us sort of understand the Joburg market usually clears out at this time. It's not as quiet as it usually is, although in the Cape, I've been seeing people begging, please stop coming. There's no space left. We cannot have you anymore. But anyway, talk to us about the leisure travel in South Africa.
Look, a couple of things. This was one of the big surprises for me coming out of our survey. So when we asked people, what are your barriers to travel? 88% of people said actually the cost is prohibitive for us to actually go on vacation. The next nearest number was 27%, which is 88% versus 27%, where people said they'd rather spend their money on other things than reallocate the spend. But 88% affordability of people saying affordability is a challenge. But of those that are going to spend, I think, travel clearly it's local. I think international travel and just with the exchange rates, it's just become very prohibitive unless you're in the sort of top end of the market. So a lot of people are seeking, as you said, Dan, to staying at home with family, or if we're going to travel, it's going to be local. Now, quite interesting, if you look at the way the split of local travel, right? What we found in our survey is that people are actually prioritizing proximity over the sort of quality of lodging. So instead of going to a 4- or 5-star hotel situated somewhere, we'd rather travel further and get to a place where we can experience something and have the experience of that, even though we forego sort of the high end of accommodation and we move to another form of accommodation. And if you look at the split between, are people going to go to hotels or are they going to go to Airbnb? It's around a 50-50 split in terms of where we're going to actually go and find lodgings. But choosing proximity over quality of lodging, and then obviously choosing the type of affordability within where you want to go, a split between hotels and sort of private Airbnb type accommodation.
Yeah. So just one or two more questions before I let you go. Are you anticipating further changes in consumer spending over the next few weeks? Obviously, we still, we in it. There's still a way to go in the holiday season. I think people have really just hit the holidays now, and perhaps things might change.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about it this morning, because we're going to have the Christmas spend, and I think people are going to, congregate as families and enjoy the festivities. And then we've got back to school coming sort of early in January. And some children, because of affordability, might be getting sort of school gifts in their Christmas packets. But I think, we're going to get the next phase around back to school. And then we're back into, the South African consumer reality, which is trading through the next year. And as long as interest rates are high and as long as we've got pressure on prices, it's gonna keep inflation high. So people are still going to be cautious. But I think it's become, as we were saying earlier, a way of life. People will just continue. But I think shortly after Christmas and shortly after back to school, there'll probably be a reality check. And then people will sort of go through until we see some form of, stimulation in the economy and interest prices coming down, maybe.
Yeah, indeed. Let me ask you this, though, and this I sort of didn't let my mind get to and wasn't thinking about this, but apparently South Africans are. Anxiety about climate change on the rise. And I suppose one can understand that. We're watching it, we're experiencing the changes in weather wherever we go. I mean, could this be a reflection of heightened awareness on the issue? Perhaps you want to give us a bit of an explanation there.
Yeah, very definitely. So as I said, we started this survey in COVID, and we've been running it almost for 3 years on a monthly basis. And interesting to see how people thought about spending then and how they thought about spending now. But one of the things when we ask people, what are your net anxieties? Obviously, as I said earlier, financial is the biggest anxiety for consumers in South Africa. But sort of third on the list is, the concern about the climate and the concern about the world, which is quite interesting because that was nowhere near in the early days when we ran the survey. So there's definitely a heightened increase around concern around that. And I think just the weather extremes that we've even had in South Africa, sort of high temperatures, low temperatures. I was speaking to my father in KZN last week, and he was sort of shivering and quite cold, and this is like mid-December, right? So the extreme weathers around the globe, the floods, the heat, all of these are impacting the way and the cost of the way the logistics moves around the world, feeding into prices. But I think consumers have become more concerned. I think post-COVID there has been a sense of reality, that we need to just pause and look at the effect of what we do, on our environment. And people are at the back of their minds thinking about that. Now, whether that filters through into, am I prepared to pay more because a product is produced sustainably? I think we still got to go through quite a bit of debate in South Africa because price does drive the buying behavior. But certainly a concern coming through from consumers is the state of the global, of global warming and the effects of that.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. Rodger, thank you. Thanks so much for chatting to us. An interesting one. I'd love to check in with you again once the festive is over and we get all those numbers in, just to see those consumer habits and the accuracy around how South Africans are spending their money at this time. Of course, Rodger George, the consumer industry leader at Deloitte Africa, speaking about South African consumers changing their spending habits, noticing that a lot more is spent on food and families getting together as opposed to these lavish gifts and getaways. So quite an interesting one. We'll see how it all pans out.